Welcome back to the Leather Shop. I'm your host, Matt Roach, and I am here with Terry from Terry Crafted Watch Straps, who I have admired for a while. Terry, thanks for jumping on, man.
No, awesome. It's great to be here. Love to have a chat and just tell you a little bit about ourselves, and then and talk about watches, perhaps.
So, I love watches. We were chatting for a minute before. I love watches, and that's clearly how I found you on Instagram. And your work is awesome. Like, I think watch straps are one of the testaments to details in leathercraft. I think the margin of error in a watch strap is so minuscule that you have to pretty much be perfect everything you do on a watch strap. There's just no room for error.
For sure, for sure. Honestly, it's a great that you mentioned this point. When we're dealing with measurements, we're talking about fractions of a millimeter, right?
Yeah.
And people uh, don't really think about that when they say, "Oh, I need a 20 millimeter strap," and I say, "Okay, yeah, when I'm building a 20 millimeter strap, it's not just 20. We're doing 20.3 millimeters. That point 0.3 makes a difference, right?
Yeah.
And why do we do it? And there's all these technical stuff why we do it. But yeah, it's a very precise work, and we do all that by hand. Imagine that, no machines, just cutting and a caliper.
It's crazy. And the funny thing is, so I have tried to like use my sewing machine to, just trial and error, try to do some watch straps. And I find, and maybe it's the machine I'm using, I don't think it lends itself to watch straps. It's almost like if you're going to do it, you need a very specialized, finely tuned machine to sew and have it look good for a watch strap because you have to be so precise. It's very, very hard to do a watch strap sewing it on a machine.
Let me tell you a secret. I don't know how to use a sewing machine. Uh,
It's hard. I'm not gonna lie. I'm learning. I just got it like 6 months ago, and it's
yeah,
hard. Like it is not easy.
yeah, I've seen those, and the more professional they are, the harder it is to use. And a tiny little pressure on the foot, and then that thing zooms so quickly that I was talking to Rachel, someone I work with, and she had a friend try out one of those industrial grade sewing machines, and she had forgotten how sensitive and how fast it is, and she got her hand basically stitched right into the leather from the top and
Ouch.
bottom. uh,
Oh.
I was like, that is
Oh.
my worst nightmare. And I was like, you know what, I don't need a sewing machine because we do everything by hand, so that means saddle stitching.
Yeah.
um, we are planning to have machine stitching on certain aspect for product testings and whatnot, and certain things that it just doesn't make sense for hand stitching. But primarily now we're 100% hand stitched. So that means two needles, a thread, and a stitching iron, and we're good to go.
Yeah. And one thing, whenever you do eventually get a machine, make sure, and most of them will come with this, make sure you get a speed reducer
Oh yeah.
because what happens is I put mine, and maybe it's just because I'm a complete novice with it. I put it down to the lowest possible setting, and it's like it takes forever to go through like one stitch. It goes like really slow up and then back down. It's like almost like your hand winding it. It's so pokey, but like I do that on purpose because I don't trust myself to like you can put it up high and it'll just zoom past and I'm like,
Yeah.
yeah, right. Like I'm going to lose a finger like your friend probably did. Like it's like crazy how fast they can go and they're
Oh yeah.
powerful too.
Oh yeah.
Like depending on which machines you get, like some of those will go through like a quarter. I've seen online like people will have it go through like a penny, and I'm like, if it can go through a steel penny, like a copper penny, that's terrifying to me. Like I don't want to be anywhere near that.
No,
Um,
not your fingers.
yeah. So one thing I've wondered is, and I always wondered this with watch straps, and I see a lot of people doing it different ways. What type of stitching irons do you prefer and use because I feel like you kind of need you need very small, so 2.7 or smaller sometimes. But do you always stick with French style? Do you do round? I know some people use round dent. Like, what do you prefer and find to be? It comes out the best for you depending on what you're using.
Right. So I'll elaborate a little bit on that. So we use many different irons, but we have our favorites. And most of our work are done with a round dent instead of the French style. Um, and there's a good reason to that. The If you look at all the major manufacturers, right, um, most of them they are done in a straight fashion, right,
Yeah.
which doesn't have the slant. And if you look at all the makers out there, there's tons of them, right? And what you're going to find is that most of the straps that you see out there, custom made or made in Asia or France or whatever it is, they all look the same. They literally all look the same. And why is because they're taking that, let's call it quote unquote traditional craft, and they're afraid to deviate from it, right? They say, "Oh,
Yeah.
hand stitching needs to be slanted style," and that tells me that is hand stitched. And I said, you know what? When I started this, and I said, all right, what looks best on a watch, right? Let's not focus on like, oh, what's traditional? I must follow tradition. No, let's first and foremost focus on what gives that best look to match the watch. And then so I said, okay, round end, that's the way we go. It's more modern. We still get really nice clean lines. And but sometimes I'll take on a project if we want to go kind of that retro style. I sometimes use a French style, right,
Yeah.
for specific looks. But I don't stick to a sing. I don't really say I need to be in that traditional style to be a handcrafted craftsman, right? In terms of sizing, though, 2.7 I think is a little too close together
Mhm.
for stitching, and we tend to use 3.38s.
Interesting. I've
Yeah.
It's funny. I always hear people, and of course it's not people who like professionally make watch straps. And they always, and I myself personally, like I went tighter on it, and I actually got some 2.7s for when I make watch straps. And I do find that it is a lot, it's a lot more stitching, but it
Hmm.
does look very, very tight. And I always thought that was the point of what you should do. But that's interesting that you say that.
It's the look, right? Like, and then this is the part where I think we differentiate ourselves amongst the competitions and all the stuff out there is they do one size fits all model,
Yeah,
but
you
we
can't.
don't. Like, look at the amount of the different styles of watches, the different sizes of watches, right? Like if I take a Panerai, for example, a big watch, right, and if I stitched on that tiny little thread, because when you do 2.7 stitching, you kind of have to use a much thinner thread for it to look properly,
Yeah.
and to mix that with a modern 44 mil watch, just doesn't fit visually. It doesn't look right,
Yeah.
right? So you have to adjust for that. But if you take the same thick stitching and longer stitching, sometimes we use 3.85s for those, and put it on a vintage 34 millimeter watch, that also looks out of place, right? So there's no one size fits all type of situation. And this is where we take our artistry and say, hey, again, goes back to what I was saying, what looks best,
Yeah.
right?
So you pretty much go between, the 3.38 and the 3.85 in certain instances for the most part.
Yeah, we're gonna add a three, just straight threes for fine tuning purposes. Just having a variety makes our job a little easier.
I wish I had talked to you before I asked my wife to get me the 2.7s for Christmas. Santa brought me a
Yeah,
2.7 round dent. And it's funny, before I even, really looked closely at yours, I always had this feeling that like round dent would lend itself to watch straps.
yeah.
And that was the reason why I did that. And
Where did you
now
buy it?
I got the KS Blade.
Yes. Yeah,
I really love them so far. I find them to be super clean, super easy to use. I like the weight on them.
yeah. They're good.
Yeah,
The
and they're
ship
not
like
even a partner. I feel like I should email them, try to get them to be a partner for the show because I use honestly every partner is a company that like I use like all the
yeah,
time. And I just got them and I didn't reach out because I hadn't used them enough. But after using them a little bit,
yeah.
I like love the feel of them. They're really, really nice.
Honestly, they are like all my strap hole punches. I'm just looking at them, and all my punches, they're in the irons. They're all KS blades. Um,
Yeah.
they
And
work
a
well.
lot of it is preference.
Yes.
There's people who love Cinnabrox, there's people who love Crimson Hides, there's people who love, you know, Kevin Lee, there's people who love, different stuff. It's everybody has a preference. And I think it's, your hand size, your stitching stuff. Like I think there's so many factors that go into it
Yeah.
that I'd be like disingenuous to say this is the best one. I think you got to try a bunch. I think
Yeah.
you got to see what really fits you well and what's comfortable.
For sure. For sure. And a lot of those guys, they kind of tend to focus more on the French style.
Yeah.
Um, and so I don't know this for a fact. I don't see a lot of people making round dent.
I would agree with you. I don't there's a few, but or well, I'll say round dent, but also a good round dent because I think you
Yes.
can easily screw that up and just have it not be good.
Not sharp enough, right?
Yeah, and you have to really make sure you have a good board under it because you can screw that up so fast that
Yeah.
like and then you're never like once that thing gets flat, it's hard to get it to be exactly the way you received it.
Oh, for sure. And this is one thing I like about them is individual tips can be replaced.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, but we have to send the thing back to Korea and get it back.
Yeah.
I wish it was like we can buy it and drop and sort of do it
That's
our
the
own.
hard part. There's so many great tool companies
Yeah.
internationally, and their customer service is awesome. They're willing to fix anything, but the
Yeah.
shipping ends up being almost the cost of the tool. That you're like, well, I don't really need to get this, replaced or sharpened. I'm like, what's the point? It's going to cost me $50 to get it shipped there and back.
Yeah. It's
Like,
not cheap. It's not.
yeah, I'm like, I might as well just buy a new tool and keep the other one for scraps.
Yeah.
Or
Yeah.
change it from a 5 dent to like a 4 dent or something. You know what I mean? Like I know it sounds crazy, but I'm like, I don't even like want to like deal with it. It's just,
Yeah. Send one off. And
yeah,
one off, and then I say you're good to go.
yeah.
Yeah,
No, but they really do have some good ones, and I do like, round dents a lot. I'm learning to like them. I made the thing that's interesting with round dents, and since you have more experience, I'd be interested to see. Do you do when you're stitching? Do you do traditionally on a French, you do the kind of like the you go over when you pull it through to get where
hmm
it looks nice on both sides. What I forget
hmm
what that's called. The tape, not
casting.
casting. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Do you cast on the round dent?
No,
You don't.
doesn't.
You
It
just
doesn't
do
really matter.
basic. Yeah, I always wonder that, and it's funny. I actually before we chatted, because I have a little piece from a friend of mine. So anybody who's listening, Double Bend Leather. His name's Tim. He's unbelievably talented. He does a lot of bags.
hmm
Check him out on Instagram.
Yeah.
He sent me some shell stuff, like just to try, because I'd never tried shell cordovan before,
Yeah.
and I was trying the round dent on a scrap corner to see the difference between casting and non-casting
hmm
because I'm making myself a little kind of like a little card holder with some of the pieces.
That's nice.
And I'm also making a watch strap, and I learned the hard way on the pullover, like the piece that you would kind of tape and have where the pin goes in. I went a little too thin because part of the bend was starting to rip.
Oh, I see.
I don't know how people hit without a skiving machine. I don't know how you can hand skive it to be perfect. Like I feel like you almost, if you're gonna do beautiful watch straps, I feel like you almost need to have a bell skiver.
You know what? I will agree with you. And the thing is, okay, I'll tell you a little backstory. So I started this 6 to 7 years ago. Let's call it that. For the majority of that stretch is as a hobby on the side while I had my corporate job.
Oh, the
And
plot thickens. We got a corporate background.
I,
Oh, okay. I like this plot now.
I know. I actually I did spend 7 years in the investment industry as quote unquote a portfolio manager for a financial institution, and then we manage private debt products for for ourselves. And at the time, before I left, we as a group we managed about 11 billion in assets,
Whoa.
and I had about just a billion of assets under my management.
Yeah.
Um, and like like it's a completely different thing. And people ask me, how did you go from that to leather? Anyhow, so maybe we can go into that a little later. But for the majority of that time, I didn't have a belt skiver, right? And then
Yeah.
I was working with all kinds of exotics from like stingrays to beaver tails to alligators, and they all need to be thinned down. And what I did for that 5 years was I hand skived everything. I
Yeah.
kid you not. I went from skiving and cutting up my leathers to being able to thin down leather from like 1.5 or 2 mil thickness to a consistent zero point 0.8 millimeter.
That's a skill in itself, and it's a good skill to have. I'm not
It
saying
is.
you can't do it, but you can do it without a bell skiver, but and it's good to learn the skill, but you'll ruin more leather without it.
For sure, 100%. And the thing is, because I forced myself to do that out of necessity, uh, I like to think I'm better at hand skiving than a lot of people. Um, and that's just simply because I had to do it for a long period of time and
Yeah.
practice all the time. And that has made me a little bit more comfortable skiving. Now I still do hand skive, not as much, right? Things precisely, because remember we're talking about fraction of a millimeter here. But after the moment, I still remember the day I got the bell skiver and I tested it out for the first time, and it was on a beaver tail because that thing is it's a pain, similar to shell, and it's skived just like butter. And it was the best time. And I run upstairs and told my wife, say, I got this done in 30 seconds. It would have taken me half an hour by hand. It was a happy day. So, yeah, I agree with you, but it's a good skill to practice if you don't have one. And this is the time to do it.
Yeah, no, 100%. It's on my to-do list of to get one eventually. It's also hard because my shop that I work in is so small that if I get it, A, something has to leave, and B, I have to get it as a sponsored product because there's no way on God's green earth my wife is going to go let me buy a bell skiver. So that's the only way that thing is entering our house is if
Yeah,
somehow it does not come out of my bank account and I move other things out of the garage so that I can put that in there because that was the only way I could get the sewing machine in
right.
because there's stand-up machines so you have to clear out that like square footage of it has to be floor to ceiling. Like you have to clear out like 6 feet high. So I have to give up a lot of storage in a very small
Right.
garage to make it work, which
Well,
is hard.
well, technically, you could trade your sewing machine for that, and then go on to hand stitching. I can teach
Oh, I hand stitch.
you. Yeah,
I'd say 80% of what I do, ninety
that's
percent
good.
of what I do.
That's pretty good.
But eventually, I want to make bags, and
Yeah,
the thought of hand stitching a bag makes me want to hide in the attic because I don't know how anybody does that and
yeah,
does it. I made my wife a bag from my friends. I don't know if you ever heard of Hemlock and Hyde. Nick
no.
and Leanne, they're friends and they were on our first episode and they are amazing. And I made their one of their bags for my wife
Oh, cool.
and I hand stitched it. And by the end, it's funny. I messaged Leanne. I go, I don't know how you ever did this because I want to pull my brains out when I was like 80% of the way through. I was like, that was so stressful and so like just daunting. I was like, I don't ever want to do that again. I will sew all the rest of them.
You know,
'Cause gussets are hard.
They are because they bend, right?
Yeah.
And you know what's funny is, and the people that came through work here, they all seem to enjoy stitching, hand
Yeah.
stitching, and it's actually one of the easiest thing to teach.
It's the easiest thing to learn, but the hardest thing to master, in my
Yes,
opinion,
it's
because
it's
it
it's
is not easy to do if you go from your and the problem is people see the Instagram effect and they see what Peter Knits looks like or, what other high-end bag makers are and they go, "Oh,
yeah.
that looks beautiful." And you see yours and you go, "Mine is not that." And it's like that was probably 20, 15 years of him hand stitching a lot not looking good.
Yeah, you know what? I always say that the the stitching is dependent on how well you punch the stitching holes, right? The better you do that,
Yeah.
and the better your stitching will look, right?
That's an interesting take. I've never actually heard it from that perspective, but now that you say that, I could see that. That makes sense.
It's especially round end. Like you see more so on French style. Say you are not following the line exact, right? And then you're gonna have crooked lines for sure, right?
Yeah.
But if you punch in your stitching iron deeper in one punch and then shallower on the other,
Oh,
that
you're
will
the
mess up
thickness. Yep.
that will mess up your lines because the deeper you go, sometimes depending on the stitching iron you use, the wider the hole is, and the wider the hole when you do casting, so the slant on the angle will change,
Yeah.
right? And then so when you're looking through it, and that's why you see some of the let's call it not professional, the amateur, the hobbyist, right? Their lines from far away looks good, right? But when you
Yeah.
start looking closely, some are slightly angled more, some are less, and you start to see that inconsistency. And with a round dent, you are able to get away with that a little bit more, right?
Yeah.
But there's still aspect of it where you have to be careful because the way how round dent works. So the pressure, actually not the pressure, I should say, the pulling, the
Yeah.
strength of
The
it
t- the
has to be
tension of how you
consistent.
pull it out.
Exactly. That's the word I'm looking for. Tension. The tension has to be consistent all the way through. Otherwise, you're going to have crooked,
Yeah.
kinked products. Anyhow, so we could talk about the technical details all day, but it's,
I
you
can get
know,
lost in the details. I feel like it's also like an occupational hazard, and I think you could probably understand this too because you came from a financial background. Is when you spend so much of your 9 to 5 life or your life in the weeds,
mhm,
you get kind of obsessed with the little nuances. And I don't
mhm.
know if that's just an occupational hazard or a character trait. Like, I don't know if it's just me or because I'm so used to focusing on the minutia.
Both. I think a lot of it is part of who you are, and then and being able to to step back in these circumstances is actually good. And I didn't really do that until I became a business owner and sort of managing other people, right?
Yeah.
Because as much as you want to be perfect, well, you try to be perfect and everything. Nothing's really perfect, right?
Yeah.
And then you have to step back and say, hey, what do I really need to focus on? Right? Is the stuff I'm focusing for me or for the client? Right?
Yeah.
And then you have to ask yourself that question to make the business work.
And it's like diminishing returns too, because, as the
For sure.
crafter, you focus on that one stitch that didn't look perfect to you. And I don't know if the consumer always cares about the if they're going to look as detailed as you do at your own products.
Hmm.
Are they going to say, "Oh, well, this stitch kind of looks wonky," and it's like maybe you worry because you don't want them to have that critique, or the fact that like, will they actually ever notice? Like, I'm sure 90% never notice.
You know what? That's actually pretty good guess on how many percentage. Honestly, probably 1 in 10 or 20 customers ever notice things like that. You have
Yeah.
the really picky ones,
Yeah.
really picky ones, like almost unreasonable picky ones,
Yeah.
but that's rare.
And that happens too. The funny thing is and I can do that to my own world too, is the people who have the least amount of money or small grants or something like that, they tend to be the ones that will focus on like that $8 thing that, hit their account that they like, want to like look into and waste so much time on. Whereas the people who have 10 million don't care about those things. It's almost like they get so fixated on the little things, and it's interesting to see how that kind of plays out. But in terms of watch straps, you probably notice it more, is that you can see that very plainly if there's an off stitch right there. It's very easy to see.
Yeah, some of them does stick out like sore thumb, and you just have to redo it. Like it's there are certain standards that I have created for this brand that we need to adhere by. Right,
Yeah.
nothing goes out without me seeing it. Right, doesn't matter
Yeah.
how much we do, how big we get. That's the number one rule. And certain things, like for example, like I'll give you an example. Right, we use beaver tail. Right, beaver
Yeah.
tail is one of those products that people love.
I've
And
never I don't even know where I would get beaver tail. I've never seen it, touched it. Like, where do you even find beaver tail? Like, who sells that?
New York,
Really?
yeah, but they're the probably the only one. Pan American Leather. They're probably the only guys in the world right now that makes good quality beaver tails. Um,
Interesting. Oh,
yeah, because
fun
they're so
fact.
small. Unless you have a foothold in the market
Yeah.
and have a steady supply to sell to, there's no money in it, right? And if there's no
Yeah.
money in it, and people don't want to get into it unless they have huge volumes to deal with, anyhow. And then so the way how the scale works is that depending on the skin, and every skin is natural, there's unpredictable, and then the stitching line may sit in between the grooves, right?
Yeah.
In between the scales, and to have the consistent tension that we talked about, you need to tighten up your stitch. But that stitch might sit inside that groove, and there's nothing you can do about it. It's not that you can plan for it.
Yeah.
Uh, they're just impossible to do so because of the natural patterns, and that sometimes sinks in more than the rest of the stitch. You can try to correct that a little bit depending on the position of that stitch to loosen it up just a tiny bit so it doesn't look so obvious, but sometimes it's unavoidable.
Yeah.
Um, and that's something that we are okay with because that is just the nature of the product we're working with. But say, for example, on the contrary, if that stitch was completely slanted because it was a technical error, right? Then we treat that very differently, right? Then all of a sudden it becomes a technical issue rather than something coming out of nature, right? So
Yeah.
we make sure we don't have that technical error going out.
And that makes sense. I think, the exotics are definitely much harder to work with. I bought a couple of years ago, I bought some crocodile to make my wife she wants a crocodile strap. And I'm terrified to cut into it. Like, haven't even like thought about cutting it because I'm like, the margin of like me screwing it up, I want to make perfect straps before I even like touch it because it's just so expensive.
Mhm.
And
They get more expensive, by the
yeah, oh god, they're like insane. So I have a skin that I plan to use, but I'm also kind of terrified. I'm slowly working my way up. I'm trying shell cordovan now, and
They're hard
I
to use.
yeah,
Shell,
like
they're
yeah,
so
I'm
dense.
learning that it has its advantages and disadvantages. I think it's very easy to It's very easy to do edge work.
Mhm.
It looks beautiful. I find skiving to be difficult, but I find cutting it to be very easy.
Yeah,
And that's one of the things that I struggle with because I think skiving is just very difficult.
any dense leather like that is difficult to skive. Like because your knife has to be extremely sharp to have even skiving,
Yeah.
right? And because it's so dense, it's easy to have little bumps along the way, and you have to use a lot of pressure force to skive that if you don't have a sharp enough knife.
So do you hand cut everyone, or do you clicker press any, or how do you go about those? I know there's a million different
Right.
styles and sizes, so having dies could get very expensive, but for the very basic sizes that are very common, do you use any dies for any of those, or do you
No,
all hand cut?
we hand cut. So I have these custom templates made for me, right?
Yeah.
They're one size and then they're made to be longer, and then we adjust based on the individual product. And this is something that we've debated for a long time internally with my advisors and stuff, is how can I make this process a little bit more less time consuming, right? Because the whole build takes a long time,
Yeah.
right? And to run it as a business, we have to, refine the process to make it simple for the people we're training as well. And having a clicker is nice, but then again, to your point, I need to have a lot. Like,
Yeah, the
wow,
upfront to make your money back would be hard, depending on
right?
how many you'd have to need. I mean, it's a big upfront investment, but it does have some benefits, this, depending on your size, I guess.
Right. Exactly. If we're producing like a lot of straps, then yeah, it's definitely better, right?
Yeah.
But now, for now, the way we set it up is that with a clicker, we're probably saving like a few minutes. And then the way how we cut with a custom template now, we can do it in a few minutes.
Do you use acrylic for your templates, or
Yes.
do you, yeah,
Yeah.
so you have acrylic templates?
Yeah. 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 We had a custom maker to create these templates for us. Very specific measurements,
Yeah,
right?
I can see that. You know,
I
oh, sorry, continue.
I'm very particular with that. It's that template is the backbone
Yeah.
of everything. So
So this is another thing I always find is when I've made my own templates, and they're not always out of acrylic. How do you make it so that they don't slide, especially on leathers that aren't as easy to cut? Ones that could have grooves, or like
right.
things like, do you silicone back it? Do you usually? I'm assuming you don't put tape, because then that would go onto the leather. Do you have a method that you use? I've used silicone for some instances, and it works okay.
So again, and this is unconventional. We build our straps differently.
Yeah.
We don't use the templates on leather. We don't use that to trace exactly.
Interesting.
Yeah, because again,
Oh, because you do
we
it for the excess. You add excess into it.
right, that for one, and two is there's so much variations into our build between watches, because we're a true full bespoke.
Yeah.
Like, you have like guys who say they're bespoke and they custom make stuff. Yeah, they do custom make for individuals, but not really customize it to that watch.
Yeah.
They're employing the same method. They're just building it from scratch. They'll say, "Oh, you pick the leather and stitching color. Okay, cool." Um, but that's not really true fine bespoke. Anyhow, um, so to do that exactly and precisely every single time, we had to adopt a different method, right?
Yeah.
So rather than cutting the leather itself, because uh, with a different padding, if it's a little too a thicker padding, then when you trim it, then you're not going to have enough leather, right? And then it's going to look wonky. So we do that actually with um, kind of a backbone on the middle. That's where we use our template for, and we'll lay it
Interesting.
directly on that to cut our templates, and that serve as the backbone for everything else, and then we'll trim excess from that point on, right? That is the easiest way for us to control uh, consistency amongst such a high degree of variability between different products that we're sending out. If you look at any particular batch, like, I have like 4 or 5 different watches in different sizes. Like, how do you control that in different materials?
Yeah. There's
Um,
no there's almost infinite possibilities.
exactly, right. So then to combat that, that's what we did, and then say, all right, it has to be a method in which I can have someone to learn quickly. Like, sometimes, like, it's things you can teach them,
Yeah.
right? But then they just don't have the practice to sort of do that. So I need to come up with a method where it's easier. Now, if I had a clicker, I would be able to click out a template if I have to make a lot of them, right? That makes sense.
Yeah.
But for now, that will
The
do.
so the one thing I learned is I did get some dies made. I have a clicker press.
Yeah,
And if I was going to do it over again, and I think that's the hard part about when you do dies. I think you don't know it until you experience it.
yeah,
If I was going to do it, I did the size that I wanted.
yeah.
And I didn't incorporate I should add in some trim allowance. So if I was going to do it over again, I would probably add an extra 5 to 10 millimeters around the entire thing and trim that off at the end so that I could have it clean if I'm gluing things together or, other aspects that I would probably add a little bit extra length on the back. So when I do the turnover, I could, just trim it to make sure it runs flat and like just all
Right.
these little things that I've learned from using it that I think I would do differently the next time.
See, that's well. This is the difficulty is that if you build in that allowance in your clicker, right?
Yeah.
Then what is the point of having a clicker? Because then you have to trim a lot afterwards, and you're essentially hand cutting. And then hand cutting on a finished product, it's a lot harder than when they're flat.
I could see that. Yeah.
A lot harder because then your knife has to be so clean, and it has to go through this exact perpendicular angle going down. Otherwise, you're going to have a slight slant in the back and the front, and it's not going to look clean, right? Um, and then also, you also have to factor in the size of your stitching hole and the thickness of
Yeah.
your threads because that add additional width to your overall product. And
Yeah.
then to fit through a buckle, you need to be working with a certain fraction of a millimeter allowance. Otherwise, you don't have that clearance. It might rub and will damage the edge over time. So there's a whole thing going to it. So you have the budget, and then we do our edge paint after stitching, right? So, and then
Yeah.
that additionally adds additional thickness. Then you have to factor that in as well. Um,
So
so
edge
quite
paint,
complicated. Yeah.
I, well, so there's two things. So I have a thought on the. Well, you know what? I'll finish my thought on the dyes and then I'll get into edge paint because I love that conversation. So on the dyes, in my ideal world, I don't even know if this exists, and I probably need to call like Milwaukee because I think they're like used to my like wild ideas at this point. They're really cool. I
Yeah.
call the guys down there. I'm like, hey, so can we do this? Like I had a question about because they put in the holes for
Mhm.
the actual straps, like the 5 or 6 holes you put in,
Sure.
and I like called and I was like, well, hey, like, can we do this and this? And they're like, yeah, no, that'll work. Um, so that piece I think is interesting, but my ideal way of going about it would be it'd be 2 dies inside of one. It would be one with the you initially cut it with the 10 millimeter extra, and then you
Yeah.
put your finished product inside of it
Hmm.
and cut that 10 millimeter off crisp with the clicker press.
Yeah.
So it'd almost
Right.
be like one inside of another so that you cut that, you make it, you have your calipers, you do, 20 millimeter in for whatever you're going to do, or 15 millimeters in, you stitch it, get it all done,
Hmm.
remove the outside, and then you do the inside and you just get the clean edges. But that lends me to the next piece of edge paint because I love it. I think somebody dropped a coffee cup
Yeah.
or something. Was it a coffee cup? It had a coffee cup feel.
It was a mug.
It was a mug. Yeah, it had
It
that
was
like
it was a giant
that
military
ding
mug
to it.
kind of thing.
I love how every episode, and I never edit the funny stuff out because,
Yeah.
like, our first episode, we had like Leanne and Nick's like son like yelling, and then like I had an episode recently where like random things were going on with the computer. I think it's like funny when random things happen. I think it just
Which would
makes
I'll make sure she doesn't turn on the vacuum. Oh, it doesn't.
yeah, just in the
Maybe she'll
background,
do that.
just
Yeah.
starts cleaning, and you just hear like the
Yeah.
vacuum going into the background. Um,
That's
but
funny.
the thing I find is the clean aspect when you cut it makes edge painting so easy to do because and this is something I struggle with is the indent. And when I sand it and I go through all of those stages of grief sanding, trying to get it exactly flat. And I've only found one paint that I have found lends itself to getting rid of that whatever. If I mean, you can't have a huge indent in the middle,
Hmm.
or like a cavity there. But I've been using Giardini, and that has become my go-to for everything. That's all I'll use now, and I've tried every brand, and then I stuck with that.
Okay.
What brand do you like, and what have you learned through your edge painting journey? Because edge painting is a journey. I don't care what anybody says; it is a skill in itself, and it is hard.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. Uh, we started the first ever strap that I did was using a Fingbine, whatever that is.
Phoebings,
Feebings, yes. I'm sorry, it's garbage. Like
yeah, they're. I've
after
never
like
used their paints. I've used their dyes. I've never used their paints.
yeah, after a month they crack.
The paints,
Yeah, they just like completely cracks
really?
in along the entire thing. I don't even know why. Anyhow, so then I went with Vernus.
Mm-hmm.
I heard they said they they're used in a lot of like high end products, and I used it for a little while, and then I noticed that it's a lot softer. It's a
Yeah,
lot softer on the finish, and then for watch straps, it's not great because they get scratched off, they get ripped, and all that. And then until I stumbled upon Peter Knits right halfway through my journey, and then I discovered that he used uniters.
it's funny that you had that with Vernis because I had the same thing where I had flakage, and as I was sanding it, it would parts would kind of like come off.
Yeah, because
So you
the
had the
thing
same thing. So that's actually why I stopped using that because I had that same issue,
they need a longer time to dry,
and
and
the
then
it bubbles. It
it, it,
doesn't seal nice.
right. So when they bubble, and when you use heat as well, I think it has a lower. It needs to be a lower temperature setting, otherwise it bubbles a little bit faster. And on top of that, it when they're not fully cured for a longer period of time, when you try to sand, the heat itself start to um, rub off, right?
Yeah,
Almost like crumbly, and that like is extremely difficult to work with. And
I
over
got it. It
time,
bubbled a lot for me. It was
yeah,
weird. So I had the exact. It's funny we had the exact same issue, and nobody talks about that. I've never heard
no,
anybody else say that. I always thought it was me.
I that's kind of the thing, right? It's like people don't really spend that time to talk about these things, and then and these informations are not readily available online to
Yeah.
tell you these are the downfalls to these particular products, and maybe we're just not using it properly. There's you know the potential there, but Uniters has been working for us really well,
Mhm.
and we actually use a primer as well
Yeah,
before we
I
paint.
used their thickener and their primer when I did use it,
Yeah,
and
the
their
primer
stuff was pretty
fills in
good.
the gaps a lot easier, and then so you kind of like okay, so this is the thing that it goes back to sort of business sense. If we had all the time, right, we charge whatever it is and do that, we can use just the paint, right? But then paint is a lot harder to fill in the gap and then send it down, layer in,
Oh yeah,
than the primer itself. The primer itself is a lot harder, creates a really good coating, and then binds to the leather fibers really well, right? And then
yeah,
so to layer in that paint, we've actually done a number of tests where we did soaking tests and all that, comparing between the binding between the primer, and they work similarly. Um, but having the primer hardens the edge, makes wash strap edges a little bit more durable than just the paint alone.
it's funny you say that. So I also can tell you're clearly like, well, I'll use this word, you know, jokingly dorky like me, where you'll just do like test cases of things,
Yeah,
like, and I'll do that. Like I'll just cut like strips, and I'll like try different variations to get it to like work in a way that I find is best. Like I've
you have
done 50 or 100 just little strips of just painting and trying different methods.
yeah, and we've done that over the years. And when I say over the years, we as me, uh, up until recently, um, and yeah, I would just honestly trial and error because it's just not enough information out
Yeah.
there that people talk about this type of things. And I bet you, like, if we create a course to talk just that, and then I think people can get some value out of it, right? Because edge
Yeah.
painting is an art on its own.
It's funny that you say that because that's why I started up a Patreon about a month ago,
Mhm.
and it really was about having honest conversations with tips and things readily accessible for people worldwide. Now, there's people who are extremely talented, do courses that are amazing. Like I've personally done, Phil's Leathercraft Masterclass like years ago when I first started, and they're great. Um, but also they're not always accessible for everybody, and they can't get into the like nitty gritty things,
Yeah.
like the edge paint variations. Like they're for the masses, and they're very like they're high end courses, but like there's little things that you can't really always get into. Um,
Mhm.
and that's the things where people just kind of want like basic how do I get into for these purposes what type of edge what how do I use edge paint, or how do I even start to carve in leather or
Mhm.
stamp in leather or things like that. So we started that about a month ago, and we do a Discord channel where we kind of share things like that, patterns and ideas, and that's been a really interesting experience, I will say. It's been
Yeah.
really cool to see. We have people from all over the world join, and they have a different experience in leathercraft than everybody else.
Right.
It's it's
It's
cool.
always nice to share best practices amongst different workers, right?
Yeah.
And this is something that is part of growing, part of educating yourself, right? And finding what worked better for other people, and maybe you can employ that method into your build, right? And then it's all about communicating. Maybe you can share something that you know better that perhaps could help others. And then, I'm in the process of setting something up with another leather worker locally, and we'll see where it goes. But we're trying to do something similar to what you're doing, but in a physical manner.
Yeah.
To have workshops and just getting people interested about this type of stuff.
We'll have to chat more after the episode because I have so many like fun ideas. I love the idea of people having somebody in their corner, and I'm very outgoing. So when I first started, I'll talk to people, and that's easy for me. And the problem is what I find easy is not always easy for people to just go and ask random people questions. And I'll admit I wasted money on certain tools that I'm not going to get back. Like there's probably hundreds of dollars of tools that I have that I will never use. They weren't good, and it was just the social media effect that I saw them, and it is what it is. And I wish that I even had more resources to talk to and just be there of things that like I know people use.
Yeah.
Um, and it's hard because that's not always easy, especially for some people who are artistic by nature. Um, Artistic people aren't always outgoing either. I mean, I think a lot of people are introverted, and there's outliers, but I think it's creating that outlet for people to kind of learn in a manner that's conducive to how they learn and what they're
Right.
comfortable with.
Yeah.
Um,
Honestly, everybody's different.
yeah.
I'm more of an outgoing, but
I also think that lends you to the occupation you started with too, like going back to working in investments. You're
yeah.
not usually an introvert if you're going into high level investments. You can be an introvert and be an economist or be a guy that's not outward facing, but for the most part, if you're in like high finance, like investment arms, you tend to be an outgoing person because that's how you succeed in that world.
Yeah, you got to meet clients, and you got to have working in a team and coworkers, and you got to be sociable, right? And
It's how you
you
climb
want
the
to be that guy.
ladder.
Yeah, kind of. And then you know what? Good and bad. Typical corporate BS, favoritism, and politics is annoying. It's
Yeah.
annoying. I don't like that, but it is what it is.
Yeah, and that's the one
Um,
downside. And I think that's why I find leathercraft so cathartic. It's just
mhm.
like it's you and that's it. Like you can just kind of lose yourself in it, and there's something really relaxing about that.
For sure. And the caution, and again, I'm this is me, my personal perspective. I like it, and I sometimes, like you said, you're in your zone doing it. It's comforting. It's soothing. It's, you know, uh, you're in that element, right?
Yeah.
But you can't. I don't know what I find is you can't do that all the time,
No. Yeah, I agree.
right? You can't say, all right, this is what I'll do every single day, because it doesn't matter how much you love it. I think you get bored of it.
Yeah.
There needs to be a certain aspect of this whole venture that needs to be challenging and moving forward and evolving.
Yeah.
Um, and this is how people start hating their jobs. It's like when you just doing the same thing, a job every day in, day out,
Yeah.
sooner or later, you're going to get tired of it.
I think the one thing too is when people think leathercraft, they immediately go, "Oh, it's, a leather bag or a wallet." And they think that's it.
Yeah.
And the funny thing is this will be my like 6th or 7th episode. I don't know how many I've had. And each person I've had on has done something completely different than the person before them, which just shows you how large that world is. It's enormous that you can get all the way from people who make leather furniture down to a wallet. And none of them are the same. Watch straps are very different than large purses, and they're very different from, a bifold that are different from in January we had TJ Leather, and he makes things just for firemen.
Right.
So it's so unique in a sense that you can find your niche and you can always continue to expand your knowledge and not get bored. It's just a matter of finding that.
Right. That's it. It's there's some transferable skills that makes it easier to learn the other things.
Yeah.
But like for example, I can't build a bag. I don't know how.
Yeah.
Right. But I know how to build a good strap.
Yeah.
And just a plug here, we also have other style wallets and basically anything watch related in a
Yeah.
way
Yeah,
that we
plug
do.
away. Hey, when you want
Yeah.
you want to plug you, and you know what? I encourage people, be proud of your business. Like you built it from the ground up, and I think also that's a unique thing of how did you go about that? Like, how did you go from? Did you wake up one day and were like, all right, like, because clearly you have to assume that in investment makes a really really good salary. So you had to have woke. I'm assuming you woke up one day and were like, I just want to do what I love because and you could have not I'm just generalizing based on
Yeah.
typical I have friends who work at JP Morgan and Goldman Sachs and I do not live the life they live. They make a lot more than I do and it does not bother me at all, but I just know that I don't have any friends who work there who make 25 grand a year.
Well, so it didn't happen overnight. I started this through my love for watches. So I started collecting watches in my first co-op job out of MBA. While I was doing my MBA, and then I saw at the time my VP was wearing a nice Omega. I think
I
it was
love Omegas.
yeah, Omega Chrono Seamaster, black dial with the little red chronograph with the red accent hands and all that. And I was like, wow, that's a nice watch. And I said, I need to get myself one, right?
Yeah.
And then I was talking to a colleague, so we call it the big boys watch. And so after like a lot of research, and I got my first Omega, a used one. I paid about, I don't know how much did I pay, 2,800, no 2,300. I can't remember.
That's a
But
really good deal for an Omega.
I know it's a Seamaster 2254, Swords Hand. No, actually, yeah, Swords Hand, black dial. Uh, you know, beautiful, beautiful watch, 42 mil case. Um, and that was my gateway into it. And then over the years, I kept collecting different watches, different brands, and just try different things out. And one day I was like, hey, I want to throw different straps on there, and all the straps I see out there. And I was a cheapo back then. I didn't want to spend like hundreds and hundreds on straps. And I say, hey, like let me give it a try. I'm pretty good with my hands. And so one day I just decided to buy a bunch of basic tools. Right, some of those, by the way, are still in the shop that we use.
It's
Um,
funny how what makes the cut and what doesn't. Like I have some things that I've used since the first day, and they were like $2, and still use them every day.
they're fine. You don't some of the stuff you don't need an expensive tool,
Yeah,
right? A
it's true.
mullet, the mullet that I still have here, I paid nothing for it. And like, why do you need a really nice mullet? Anyhow, so then that's how everything started, and started making my first drop. They were pretty crap, but uh, you learn from it, right? And watch
Yeah,
tons of videos. And 2021 November, that's when I quit. I basically said, oh, fuck it, I'm done.
yeah,
And that's like a 2 year in the making. I wasn't happy in that place, and then it was not getting better. So it's either me going to another shop, continue my finance career, or do something on my own. And people have encouraged me to say, hey, you have a great product. Why don't you make something out of it? And then one day he's like, you know what? Let's do it.
yeah. And you got to take those leaps of faith. And I actually admire people who are you know, strong enough to take those risks. I think I'm in in general extremely risk averse, and I'm sure it lends yourself into the careers you choose. Like I chose a career that has a lot of stability. You know, my
And that's fine.
I'm very niche in what I do. Like very few people have the backgrounds that I do. So like there's a lot of job security in that. And that's a great thing, but also I admire people who can take those risks and do that. Like it's that in itself means something. It stands for something that shows a lot about who you are as a person that you're willing to take those risks.
We only live once.
Yeah.
That's what I say.
What did you think was the hardest part going from your job to starting up shop?
Um, it's the fact that you are all by yourself doing everything. There are too many jobs. There are too many roles that you're taking on.
Yeah.
Uh, you know, and I started reading this book, and essentially, to frame it, easily, is in the start you're the entrepreneur, you're the manager, and you're the technician.
Yeah, it's
Right?
true.
You're between balancing acts of those three roles. You can't miss either of those, because the entrepreneur allows the business to drive forward. The manager allows everything to be organized and to run properly, and then the technician's doing the job. But
Yeah.
as a leather worker, you're forced to be in that technician stage all the time.
Yeah.
And that was a very challenging aspect of it. And people underestimate how much work you need to do as a manager, as an entrepreneur, to move the business forward. And this is like, and I think this is an important message, for aspiring leather worker who wants to perhaps start an own business, is that you can't go into this and thinking, okay, I'm just going to do this as a job, because you're if you're just building a business as a job, then you didn't own a business, you own a job.
Yeah.
And the moment you say, if you're sick, you want to take a vacation, nothing runs, then what did you really create? And that's my take, is like, for me, going into this, I said I can't just have a job. If I
Yeah.
wanted a job, hey, I
You
think
had a
I'll do
job.
better in the finance world, right? I
Yeah.
wanted to build a business, and that's a different two different things. So be prepared to understand that there are a lot of business aspect that you really need to attend to, and not just doing the job. That was the hardest thing I have to go through, and learn the hard way. And then the second hardest is fighting people. Um, so I'm looking at Rachel here as
Yeah.
I'm saying that.
It's funny that that was probably like the most insightful response I've ever heard to that question. And it's because of the way you framed it. It's you can't do it for a job. And I think a lot of people look for it as a way to do what you love and pay the bills, but you can't see it as just a job. You have to see it as you're building the business. I think that is like extremely insightful and like very
It's a different
well
take. And
rational.
this,
It's rational.
yeah, I mean, like this is where I take on from my, I try to incorporate my business studies and sort of what I learned from a corporate world, right? To incorporate into this business. And like, and you just have to ask yourself, like, what if I got sick? What if I can't work?
Yeah. Health
What if your
insurance.
yeah, what if your family is dependent on you? And then what do you do? Right?
Yeah.
And that just has to be something that people think through when they go into it.
And I think it's one of the downsides of, and I'll say this for multiple industries. I think there's a lot of things that people aren't taught are skills that go hand in hand. I'll say on the artistry side, people they're not taught the business side. You know, you're taught how to be an artist, but you're not always taught how to be a business owner. And I can speak from experience. It's doctors and hospitals. You go to medical school, they teach you how to be a doctor, but they don't teach you how to be a manager, a practice owner, a they don't teach you how to be a compassionate person. They don't teach you bedside manner. And now they're slowly incorporating those things into curriculum, but I think a lot of these things are lost where they go hand in hand. Like you
Hmm.
have to teach people, you can teach them how to be an amazing artist, but if they don't know how to actually take that artistry, not everybody is going to be Banksy.
No, they
It's
they won't survive, right?
yeah,
Unless they're like the Michael Jackson of the world. Their sheer talent and sheer hard work and their ability to do what they do best just outweighs, and then someone will do it for them. But in this world, there's so many artists that you know they're amazing artists. They come out, they want to do something, but then they fail because they either get failed to be discovered, right?
yeah.
And they just fundamentally don't have that business sense to do something. So you kind of have to have some of that training
And
to
it's
understand.
unfortunate too, and that also could be part of the reason why so many restaurants fail. You know, people are amazing chefs and cooks, but your food could be the best in the world, but if you don't have strong business sense, it's never gonna be anything. And I think those are interesting things. And I think um, the collaboration of your skill sets you bring together makes for a really cool and interesting combination. Um, you
I'm still
know,
trying to figure this out. It's not easy, right?
Yeah, and that's what makes it interesting, though. I think you learn something new every day, and I'm sure that probably adds to the intrigue of it. Also, the
Yes.
stress too. So you're going to go gray a lot earlier. You know, the business owner.
I
You
have the
know
Asian genes,
that.
so I don't turn gray until 60 on the dot, and then bam, everything turns.
I also am like, what is it about? It blows my mind how like somebody can be like. It's funny. There's this woman who lived in my neighborhood. I was friends with her son, and she was like almost 70, and she looked like she was like 35. 4. I'm like, how does it even happen? Like, I wish somebody would like do. I'd watch a documentary on it because like she doesn't like people like they don't even age. I was just astonished. Like, I don't know how it happens.
I, you know what? I don't know. People joke about Asian genes. I don't know if that's like true or not. But I was a funny thing. I was hearing a show. Bob was it Bobby Lee? Do you know that comedian? From
No, a name maybe sounds familiar, but I don't know who he is.
and he was on was it Logan Paul's show? They were talking about it, and then he was surprised that Bobby was 51, and I was surprised, and I didn't think, and then he said his secret was no stress. It's like, hey,
Interesting. Did he not
let
have
us.
kids? Like, I feel like you can't have a stress-free life
Yeah,
with
you know what? Yeah, yeah, I know.
like
That's the
either
thing.
you
I
if
don't.
you have money and no kids, I feel like it's a little bit easier to be stress-free.
Yeah, I mean, you don't have to.
and not
The
no
money
money
part
from
helps.
working. Like
Yeah,
it's also you can't have the stress from the job that gives you that money either. It's almost going to be like inherited money.
you have to be somewhat, well, you have to be, I think you have to be content with the situation you're in.
Yes.
And then, and where, and this is, and this goes back to what I was before in the corporate world. In that environment, it's hard to not be stressed, and like
Yeah.
as much as you want to. And then it's other people influencing you as well, right? It's
Hmm.
all you talk about is, okay, what's the bonus? Like, how can I make more money? When do I get promoted? How do I get on this deal? And what I need to do, right? And it's that mentality, and how can you possibly living a stress-free life like that?
Because you always want more. I think that's just,
E-
it
exactly. And
never
the moment,
ends.
exactly, and the moment you step out of that, and then you said, okay, you're doing something that makes you happier, then that stress level goes down with it,
Yeah.
right? I struggle on other things building this business.
Yeah.
I struggle and I work a lot, but I feel I'm a lot less stressed in different ways.
Yeah. You're right. I could see that too because it brings you joy, the business itself, whether or not it's harder or not. A, it's yours, and B, it brings you happiness. You're building
It's still
something.
stressful, but different.
Yeah.
And then, so, I think, if you're happier, less stressed, in a non-toxic, in a non less stressed and not in that toxic environment, then I think that's one of the key for longevity. And if you're less stressed, then
I could see that. I think it's yeah. I think it's just happiness derives a lot of it.
yeah,
Um, yeah, that got deep but poignant. I feel like that was like there's a lot of truth. There's a lot of truth. There was like some truth bombs right there. I like it. It's there's a lot of meaning to it. I think that, and I've talked about this on probably other episodes too, is that the pandemic it got people to reevaluate their lives completely. Like people really thought about what makes them happy.
yeah,
You
it's
you reevaluate friendships, what's worth your time. You
it's
understand that resource. It's a finite amount of time you have, and who's worth your time.
I know. Like, we have a little one, and being able to spend more time as we're growing up, it's once in a lifetime opportunity, right? Once that's gone, it's gone.
Yeah.
Uh, and again, like exactly like you said, we have to evaluate what's important for us.
Yeah. Like for me, being able to pick up my son every day at school and not worry about traffic and all those things, to me, that is worth making less money because I could easily go to pharma or an investment firm and make triple what I make. But I would miss those things. I wouldn't be able to coach his basketball team or soccer team or do those things. And that to me is worth way more than the salary I would get.
That's exactly right. And I love how we're giving life lessons, but it is very true. Once
Yeah.
you find that calling, money becomes less important. And then people ask me, like, how much, like, what do you want to get out of it? And I look, I want to build this business the right way.
Yeah.
If the business succeeds, then everything else will come with it, right? And then the money will be a secondary benefit, right?
Yeah.
It is not the primary motivator for why I'm doing this.
Yeah.
Um, and that's, I feel like that's something that works for me,
Yeah. And it's
right?
not for everybody, but if you can find joy in it, I think that's important. And I also feel like I found like my Canadian like kindred soul over there. I feel like you are like my doppelganger in Canada. But there is one thing before, on this episode I can't not ask you about, and there's two things. But the first one is I originally found you because I think it was one of your Stingray straps, and I
Yeah,
made myself a Stingray wallet, and I broke a pricking iron. It is the hardest material I have ever worked with, and probably will ever work with. And
yeah.
you somehow made a watch strap that was like elegant and perfect. And I was like, how on earth can anybody do that without A,
Thank you.
ripping their hair out, and just, it was just pristine. I don't even know how, and I can't even tell if you stitched it. I don't know what you did, but somehow you made like a perfect, you did it on a, it was like a Rolex or something.
Yeah,
It
yeah.
was like a, it was a
I
black one
know.
because I
I know what you're talking about. It's just images pop up in my head. Um, so there are a couple of design cues to that. A, um, we said let's take away our traditional padding style,
yep.
okay, and then we'll do an oyster flex style padding.
Interesting. Now, what is an
So
oyster flex?
oyster flex is a rubber bracelet
Yep.
on precious metal pieces, Daytonas, uh,
Okay.
in the Rolex lineup. Okay, so the design cue is that the padding itself is like a thin strip in the middle that
Oh,
races.
like the Jubilee piece, like on
No,
the.
not the Jubilee, not the but it's a rubber. But it's rubber. They
Oh,
call it a bracelet because in the middle of that rubber is a metal piece,
yeah.
right? And then outside layer is the rubber. If you just type in oyster flex, if you look it up on
I'm
Google,
looking it up right now because I'm like that is, that just sounds so cool. Like,
right? And then we said, okay, I always like the oyster flex look on a Rolex sports model, and let's build something similar to it, right? And
yeah.
then and that padding style
Oh,
is a design cue that lends to the overall look. And then
this is
second
cool.
part of it, and then the client wanted to have an accent stitching around the lugs, right?
Yeah.
And people do that a lot. And I told them, it's like, don't do it. Leave
Yeah.
it as it is because it's so clean. I picked out a part of the Stingray that had a really nice, darker grain to it, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I said, okay, we can add in a leather component accent to it and then just leave it be because sometimes less is more.
Now, how does that? Now, I know you can glue it, but how do you ensure that that will always stay together with the rigors of the bend of your wrist, and like,
Right.
that is so
Y-
fascinating.
you have to prep the surface in which you're gluing well,
So you just
right?
pretty much like almost like you take like your like your scruffer, and you must have to like really.
Yeah, certain parts you have to, but certain parts you don't. The stuff that we're using called Salamander, uh, they are they're fairly rough by nature, and then it picks up glue really well. And if you glue something well together, and this is you have to use the right glue as well.
Yeah. Oh, don't
Uh,
I have the longest conversations, and it's funny. I'm trying out a new glue now because it's like my never-ending quest for finding the right glue. I actually
uh,
Buckle Guy. I'm getting some of their new stuff because I just want to try the new
Equal
Eco
Stick,
Weld. Yeah,
Equal
they
Stick,
that's what it
or
is. Yeah, they got two new kinds. They got the I don't know,
Equal Stick 1816B. That's the one. Uh,
1816.
B.
So I don't think that's the one that they just added. They added the 1804 and the 9015.
Yeah. So yeah, I, a a fellow worker, leather worker, actually contacted me because we imported the stuff directly from the manufacturer,
Interesting.
right? And then we distribute it out here to leather workers out here. And then this is the difficulty as a Canadian makers, we can't get anything without import,
And the fees and the taxes,
right?
it's crazy.
So anyhow, so I'm actually setting up a site, a related business in addition to my maker's business, to actually be the only exotic leather retailer distributor in Canada.
Oh, so you'll sell your own skins.
Basically, yeah. Basically, I everything's already up. I'm basically providing Canadian makers an avenue to use these stuff without incurring the hefty permit fees
So you're
because
gonna already take care of the CITES stuff, like all the.
everything everything's already done.
Oh,
So
wow.
everything within the domestic Canada shipping and trades, there's no more permits that's needed because I've already taken care of that, right? So
Yeah.
now rather than because there's a lot of hobbyists and small makers in Canada, they
Yeah.
can't get their hands on exotics because if they need a skin that's $200, they're not going to pay $600 for permit fees.
Yeah.
It makes no sense,
Yeah.
right?
It's true.
But if I take care of that, and then all I have to do is pay the market rate in which I'm charging,
Yep.
so to put them in equal footing with our North American counterparts, right? I want to
Interesting.
promote creativity from our side. I want to promote the leather worker community north of the border
Interesting.
because
I
I
like it.
right. So um, there's not a whole lot of margins into it without going to business because that's just the nature of the business because I have a lot of fees to come in my way. But this is something I
It's a volume game.
yeah, it's something that I wanted to do because just I struggled finding suppliers
Yeah.
and over the years I've built a lot of relationships with different people
Hmm.
and then it's time to say hey maybe I can leverage that and bring these skins really beautiful skins more accessible to everyone here in Canada.
I agree. I think you touched upon that too. Is relationships are what make this entire thing work.
Yeah,
You're like if you go about trying to just do things for you, you're never going. Eventually, it's going to catch up with you, and it's not a big enough world where you can just wrong people and survive long term. It's about longevity and the relationships you build with people because that's what makes you sustainable long term.
yeah. Honestly, I don't mind sharing my secrets with people. Like, if you want to learn something, shoot me a message and I'll tell you. And I'll help you as the best as I can. Because honestly, at the end of the day, you can replicate uh, the technicals and you can learn that on the internet. Because I learned everything from the internet,
Yeah.
right? So if you really wanted to, you can. So
And
why not share,
it's
help
drive
others,
too.
right?
Anybody can learn how to do something,
Yeah,
but they can't be you because they have to want it as much as you do. So like you can learn anything you want in life. That's the great
yeah,
thing about things like YouTube and the internet. It's made education much more accessible, but you still have to want it just as much as the next guy. Like I
yeah.
could tell
And
you
then
exactly what I do every day, but that doesn't mean you're going to want to wake up and do what I do every day.
exactly,
You got to want it. It's that innate drive. Like your intelligence will only take you so far.
exactly. And it's also hard for people to replicate artistry
Yeah,
and what we see
it's
and in
skill.
combination yeah it's and the skills he can learn and then it's the other aspects that you might not be able to and it's not easy to teach anyhow so that's kind of where
You guys are
uh
going.
yeah this is where we're going we're building this in kind of I don't want to use the word luxury but in a higher end uh, style and where we cater to real watch enthusiasts who's loving the art of horology, the art of watches, and appreciate what we're doing here, right? For those timepieces that invest tens and hundreds of thousands in, right?
Yeah.
I like to think we're doing pretty well.
And honestly, that's all that matters. You try, you wake up every day, you give it your best, and clearly you are talented. I will be the first person to say
Thank you,
you make the nicest watch straps I've ever seen.
thank you. Really appreciate
And I always pick people that I think would be interesting to learn from and talk with. And I think you have amassed a skill that is very hard to just replicate. It is, you can tell that there was blood, sweat, and tears in that. And I can honestly assume that all three of those really did happen. You say that, figuratively, like blood, sweat, and tears. I'm sure that you've cut yourself. You've probably been like, I've ruined leather and like been
that.
like, I mean, it's not an easy thing. And I think we've all been there and ruined a lot of leather.
For sure. Oh yeah.
So I
I
think,
even yesterday I ruined a piece because I wasn't thinking, and then I trimmed it off a perfect piece for no particular reason. Anyhow, let's not get into that.
It's gonna bring back the tears of the sadness that comes with it. It's brutal.
Yeah. I know,
But
and
I
that's
think that's what makes this a really rewarding craft. It's not something you master overnight, and it's thing that you continuously learn every day, which is cool, I think.
I think so. And then so going back to on Stingray, we don't stitch Stingray. Um, we've done so, and there's only one particular style of stitching that uh, we can kind of do with some consistency. Some people try this, and you have to, and there's a particular iron you use. You have to use the bulky, cheap Japanese diamond stitch iron because they're
Yeah.
so bulky, they can go through it without damaging. And
Interesting. Yeah.
even it gets damaged, then they're cheap enough to replace all day
Yeah.
long. The French style, just don't even think about it. They will break that tooth like nothing.
Yeah.
Uh,
Oh, it did. Yeah. It completely, like one hit, it just completely eviscerated it.
yeah, because you're hitting on like essentially pebbles or stones on a thin blade, right? Versus the diamond stitching, they have a pointy end for one to penetrate, and two,
Yeah.
they're like
They look
thick.
clunky though, because you have to use thicker leather, and like aesthetically, it just didn't like I remember
No,
I had to
so
use thicker I also
yeah,
eviscerated the thread too. It kept getting cut while I was stitching it.
exactly. So that's why I'm saying if we do stitch it, we do a braided style stitching, and that's it.
Yeah, I used Ritza. It was the only thing I had that didn't get ripped to shreds in there,
Yeah, so
which was
that's the kind of thing.
extremely frustrating.
And you have to use a Dremel tool to sand down things. It's quite a bit of work.
Yeah. I have one more. Actually, I think I got it from Pan Am. No, I don't know where I got it, but I um I have one more that I want to make. I have some extra Stingray that I want to make some stuff out of, but I also have
Mhm.
been like staying away from it cuz I'm like it's just such a hassle. Like I made
Yeah.
that one little watch, like one little card holder, and I was like this was a nightmare.
So cutting it, I learned this from guys in Asia. So there's a cheaper way to do it. Don't use a First of all, don't use your good blade.
I use scissors actually.
Scissor. Oh yeah, you can do that, but so there are two things you can do. A is you buy an Amazon skiving knife, the cheapest you can find.
Yeah.
Okay, and then purposely dull that blade sharp enough to really hammer down, so you can put the knife down and then use a light hammer to
Oh, clever.
right to cut it, right, because it's so dull, right, it doesn't chip the blade, but it's sharp enough to cut through, right, to have a relatively even cut.
Yeah.
And then you got to sand it, right.
Yeah.
The second part is you take a utility knife, the bigger blade, okay,
Yeah.
and then you basically use a mullet to hit the backbone, and then one clean hit that will cut through it pretty nicely, and you can get
Interesting.
really clean cuts. Yeah, so there are tricks to dealing with it. You just have to.
Yeah, I've always used. I have some like thick scissors that I think I got them on Amazon or something,
Mhm.
and they've worked fine for the most
Yeah,
part. And
they will work.
you cut it really slow. I would go like pebble by pebble, like little like thing, and it took me forever to cut it out.
Right.
It's
Yeah.
like 10
So
minutes later, you cut out each because you wait for each crack, and then you go to the next one. You go to the next one. I'm like, oh, this is tedious.
yeah. So the better way is just do a rough cut, and then don't even worry about getting it perfect, and then just buy a Dremel tool, and then sand it down.
Yeah, that's what
Don't
I
do it
have
in your house.
Yeah, I do it. I have it in the garage. I have my Dremel downstairs, and I go and do that.
Yeah.
And I got my massive mask because I don't want to be breathing all that stuff up.
Oh yeah, for sure.
For
Yeah, for
anybody
sure.
out there, make sure you have like a 3M, like an N100 or N95, one of those big industrial ones, because the stuff you breathe up is just nasty.
Yeah. Actually, that's a good thing to ask. We use, I use something like this. What's an N95? Yeah.
Yeah,
And we do it outside in a well ventilated area.
Yeah, I usually in the summer I'll keep my garage door open and I'll just do it down there.
Yeah, definitely do it out there.
Yeah, it's nasty.
Yeah,
Um,
it's not good stuff.
yeah, it's gross. Well, we'll have to. I feel like we have so much to talk about, but I don't want to keep you too long. So I want everybody to know where can they find you online so they can get their high quality straps from you.
Yeah, so we are mostly present on Instagram right now, and it's just Terry Crafted. That's our handle, and our website is getting built finally. And you know, it's been a while. It's been a year. I've been talking about trying to get that done.
It takes time,
But
so it is a time commitment. We can talk offline. I can try to.
we have a guy we've already engaged, and the backbone. He's already given me some templates to see how it lays out. So I just need to continue that route and get it done, hopefully in the next couple months. And it's just going to be terrycrafted.com.
Awesome.
We're going to have some interesting stuff up there. So
I like it. Well, as always, you guys can find me at I am Matt Roach and Leather Shop Pod on Instagram and leathershoppod.com. Thanks everybody for listening. And Terry, thanks for hopping on. I appreciate it.
yeah, this has been great. Thank you. Thank you for having me here. And
All right.
again, if you have questions, let me know.
All right. Until next month, guys. Appreciate you and have a good one.